Hey guys, Z here. I decided to no-life my most anticipated game of the year and have forgone any semblance of productivity. Between the release of the game and a couple days prior, I put in about 85 to 90 hours into the full release of Octopath Zero. Some of it was from the demo, but still, it's a lot of time to dedicate that quickly. And after spending a majority of the month on this game, all I could really say is, this was a really great time. Also, if I didn't already mention it, there won't be any spoilers in this video. Now, for context, a lot of the game wasn't really new to me because I went through the gacha game to first experience it. A good old 420 plus hours and counting, but some of that was for the content beyond what Octopath Zero covers, so maybe cut it down another 90 to 100 hours or so, maybe a bit more. Either way, the biggest problem I had with it was always that it wasn't built around being a gacha. At heart, it really was a single player RPG, but the design decisions around it made it so frustrating to play at times, between the forging system for weapons and gear that required an excess amount of grinding, the balancing around the game making any semblance of boss design really frustrating without pulling for some specific characters, and the artificial gating of areas, NPCs, and progression due to the affinity system. That 300-hour experience ended up being as long as it was because of the mechanics they put in to make it a gacha. Thankfully, they removed just about everything that made it so agonizing to play in this release. The affinity system in this game serves a better purpose in having it be tied to the story, as well as affecting rates from NPCs rather than it being a level or gacha thing. It can be raised by naturally playing through the game, doing side quests, and building trust levels with recruits, which is a really nice change. Outside of the story related areas, you're also free to just go about anywhere in the game, just like how it was in the other entries. The sandboxy nature of the series really is back in full force here. This game really does feel like an Octopath game now. It's also pretty lengthy even without all the gacha blood in it. On average, you could probably get 100 plus hours out of the game, even if you're familiar with the source material, which is a lot honestly. But even so, there are very noticeable changes with the game from the offset that made me have to adapt in some way. Even with my familiarity of Champions of the Continent, this was mainly with the new battle mechanic they added with masteries. The more time I spent in the game, the more I really liked the addition of the mastery system. After a character learns all their available skills, they could use extra JP they earn on some of their available moves and support skills that can then be passed around to other characters. It's a really nice way to supplement some characters that may have otherwise been missing a move or two from their original kit, or even succeed in other roles. Or even if there's a character you really like and want them to function more, this allows you to do so. I thought it'd end up being overwhelming in some ways, but a lot of it is pretty straightforward, although once you get a bunch of them, sorting through the list does take a while. That said, I kinda wish the game told you more of the specifics of each move, outside of the amount of hits a skill can do or indicators of it being a great move or a random target move. It doesn't really go into detail about its modifiers. I would have liked to know if one move I was using dealt more damage than another one without having to experiment first. The Octopath games never really do this in general, but with there being passable moves, it felt even more important in this case. But besides that, it is a really cool system I'd like to see come back in some capacity. Some characters also have skills locked to them to at least keep them distinct. There's only a limited amount of available slots that each character can use, so even some moves being passable doesn't really remove its usefulness at times. In that way, the character customization aspect is fantastic, as many of them can stand apart from each other, even when in the same class. This is further heightened by the new ultimate mechanic in the game, which is basically the same thing as the one in the mobile game. Every character has an exclusive super move to themselves, and many of them are distinct enough to set them apart from each other. It's a nice way to keep the open nature aspect of the mastery system while not making every character blend in with one another. That said, it is a double-edged sword because some characters are just outright terrible, which is also reflected in the challenge of the game. The game does seem to balance around the idea of allowing you to basically run any character you want, but because of that, a lot of the bosses never really felt that difficult. Maybe that's me specifically because I'm used to the battle system by this point, which is fair. It just became really apparent when I used some of the later recruitable characters in the game, and they would end up destroying a boss on its first break cycle, or even earlier depending. Comparing it to the mobile version, many of the fights were nerfed, which was expected, but it might have been too much at times. At the very least, they did pace out a lot of the recruitments, which let me get more time with some of them. This didn't apply to everyone, of course, because once I had a dedicated team that did basically everything I needed them to, many of them just became extras. Still, the new mechanics of the game made a lot of the skill ceiling much more rewarding. A lot of the challenge I got from the game was going into areas that were at least 10 to 15 levels above me and seeing if I could clear them. Despite the game's lower skill floor, the skill ceiling definitely feels a lot higher, which made beating fights earlier than I should have a lot more satisfying. This This was something you could do in other games, but it feels more distinct here because of the mastery and battle system changes. And on that note, there were talks about the game being about 40% new, but the specifics weren't as clear. Most of the new content really comes from the addition of Wishvale, the side quests, the quality of life updates, the new animations, both for the bosses and the Octopath 1 cast, and the story changes, some being small changes to incorporate the existence of Wishvale, and some being radically different approaches to the narrative and new areas to explore. They even cleaned up some of the dungeon designs from the mobile version here, which made going through some of them a lot smoother. That said, the largest change was definitely with Wishvale, which I found to be pretty enjoyable. The mobile game didn't really have anything like this beyond the nameless town, but I'd hardly call it the same thing. It was mostly time-gated quests that led to town development, which then opened up other aspects of the game cut from zero. Although the progression of Wishvale does tie into both the narrative and progression of the game too, which I think was fine for the most part. The game made it seem like it was its own separate thing, but you're kind of incentivized to play it alongside the main campaign because it's also how you get stuff like ultimates for everybody. The only thing I really didn't care for was some of the quality of life stuff in the game being tied to the progression of Wishvale, but by that same token, it did give me more incentive to do even more things in the game because of the system in place. Upgrading stuff is tied to the elite enemies, so I felt more obligated to go and fight them beyond extra treasure, which was nice enough. The only thing I really didn't put as much time into as I wanted to was the building aspect of the mode, where you could make your own custom Wishvale and stuff. I was planning on saving that for after I did everything else the game had to offer, and I do plan to return to that soon, but for the amount that I did play of it, I thought it was a nice pace breaker, especially since I had already played the mobile version. Having something extra to do in the game was really nice, but if I had one complaint, sometimes when I wanted to build stuff that required a specific structure, I would have to remove it from the town if I placed it down first. I'm not sure why it couldn't automatically use it up, but that was mostly just an annoyance more than anything else. This isn't even a thing exclusive to Wishvale either. There are quests that require you to give items to specific characters, but if you're already equipping them, then you have to take it off first. And again, it's not really that big of a deal, but it came up more often than I thought it would, which is why I'm even mentioning it. But besides that, I think it's a nice mode that I'm probably going to sink more time into after this. Although my favorite aspect of the Wishvale edition is from its narrative. The incorporation of Wishvale was brought into the main story, some smaller changes being present to mention it, as well as the larger changes that definitely set it apart from its mobile counterpart. In fact, the changes to the story made it a lot more enjoyable to me in the end. The endgame of Octopath 0 is now easily my favorite endgame in the entire series. Some story beats did get scrapped or just entirely replaced from the mobile version, but I think what they gave us here instead was a lot better and more cohesive in the end. Wishvale also got its own story arc alongside the already existing game, which I really liked as well. It's not as grand as the main story, and I didn't expect it to be, but I thought the way they handled it was good enough for getting me to care about Wishvale beyond the prologue, especially in some of the later chapters where it really hooks you. It got me more invested in some of the other characters, as well as the mode itself, because what you do there does tie into the main campaign. In fact, a lot of the new characters were pretty enjoyable in general. The one thing that did hold some of them back though was with how many playable characters there are, since it meant less time for every single individual character to get something to themselves. They each do get dedicated quests and tavern talks and supports and whatever, although again, it being split across over 30 characters made getting interested in some of them a lot more difficult, barring the story relevant ones. I think the voice acting is what really helped me get invested in some of the newer characters, although it's hard to say if that would even apply to the Octopath 1 cast, because I think it's banking more on your familiarity with them, which is fair, but if it is your first starting game of the series, then I don't think it's going to work as well. But even so, the voice acting really helped out a lot. It definitely felt like many of the voice actors allowed me to get invested in some of the newer characters, even for some of the newer voices that other characters got that are, again, more familiar to the series. I really liked most of the performances in the game. Unfortunately, it was really difficult to enjoy them at times. I think the one thing about this game that really messed up a good amount of my experience was the audio balancing and sound quality in general. This was an issue I mentioned when talking about the demo, but I thought it was exclusive to that. It was genuinely unacceptable throughout a good amount of the game. Sometimes you can't hear what a character is saying because it's being drowned out by the music or sound effects. Some of the tracks were also compressed or cut in a way that was really noticeable and distracting during boss fights. They did put out an update addressing this, but but I don't really know if it actually got better or not because I was already so far into the game by that point. But for the portions of the game that I played post-update, I didn't really notice any changes except for attacks that hit multiple enemies at once. That got way louder. Maybe it's only with the Steam version or something, but if anyone knows how much it improved in other areas, let me know. If it is fixed, then that's great, or maybe this wasn't even an issue for other people, but that's how I experienced the game at least, which I think was pretty unfortunate. On that note, I really wish they used some of the newer composed tracks more often. I know there were some talks about the reuse of music in this game, but a lot of the tracks that appear were made for the mobile game at the time. There were tracks from Octopath 1 that were reused from there, and in this game they also put in some Octopath 2 tracks as well, but there was a decent amount of new tracks they made for the game. For Octopath 0, they did actually make several new tracks, a lot of them being battle tracks which take over the random encounter themes now. They had a new boss theme in the prologue, but it's barely used in the game. I think the amount of times it played in the game could be counted on one hand, which is weird because it definitely could have been interchanged with some of the other tracks they used. It's not so much fault on the game as it was more of a personal thing coming from Champions of the Continent, so I was more familiar with many of the tracks. It'll basically be brand new for most other people playing it, but it's weird that it was barely utilized. However, the newest thing to this game was the addition of a customizable protagonist, and I thought that was pretty cool. The character you play as in the mobile game was based on who your lead character was, so it could have been anyone you really chose. I like how they incorporated them into the game itself, as well as all the Wishvale stuff, and since the game was already built on a silent protagonist beforehand, a lot of the game felt fine as is with it, but there were some times where the lack of voice acting from the protagonist really hurt some scenes. I already made mention of that in the demo with the prologue, but with how much more of a character focus there is with the protagonist, as well as the new story changes and scenes in Octopath 0, it became a lot more of an issue to me than I thought it would. Scenes where having them speak up in some way would have really heightened it instead of take away from it, but it's weird because there is a part where they do get voiced lines, which confused me even more. It felt very selective at times. There are 6 custom voices to choose from, and I wouldn't even say every scene should have had some voice acting because many of them hold up fine without it. However, a few scenes here and there really would have benefited greatly with them, even if it was 1 or 2 lines at most. It wasn't something I thought would come up because of how the original game is, but that extra main character aspect changed my perspective on it more. But despite the grievances I have with this game, I can't really say I regret my time with it. It was really nice playing through the game again without any of the gacha mechanics that made it grueling at times to get through. Combined with the new mechanics and other changes to the game to make it a smoother experience, it really was everything I wanted out of Champions of the Continent and more. It actually feels like an Octopath game now, which is what I wanted in the end. I'm probably going to end up putting more time into it just because I don't want to be done with it yet. I didn't build up my Wishvale as much as I wanted to since I was mostly focused on the main content of the game. I probably could get more time out of it there. And yeah, I can't really recommend it enough. I know that may not mean much coming from me since I really like the series in general, but you could always give the demo a shot if you're interested. I don't know if this is the best entry to jump into first, but it could definitely stand on its own accord. If you're completely unsure, Octopath Traveler 2 is still phenomenal and that goes on sale a lot. That's always a really good place to start. And yeah, thanks for listening to me ramble. The ones who made it here or even watch this, y'all are real ones and I appreciate it. Okay, bye!